Welcome to True Echo, where real strength meets dramatic justice. Today's story is a powerful tale of courage, confrontation, and change. When a black CEO is denied entry to her own penthouse because of prejudice, the staff laughs, until the truth comes out and lives are changed forever. Stay until the end, this is one story you'll never forget. The sun rose over Westview Towers with a cool serenity, the kind that tricked people into thinking it would be an ordinary day. But nothing about today would be ordinary, not for Julia Mitchell. Julia, the 39-year-old CEO of one of the most powerful financial firms in the country, had never lived for attention. That morning, she arrived in a plain gray hoodie, black leggings, and sneakers. No entourage. No designer bag. Just a woman heading to her home, Penthouse 29. Yet the simplicity of her arrival drew precisely the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid. Eyes trailed her from all corners of the marble lobby. White residents in silk scarves and tailored suits paused mid-sip from their lattes. Some whispered. Others frowned. All of them stared. But the real wall wasn't the stairs, it was Greg Hudson, a middle-aged white man with a clenched jaw and a superiority complex so deep you could trip over it. Greg had worked as a front gate security guard for years, and with that tenure came a belief that he could spot who belonged and who didn't. "What are you doing here?" Greg demanded, stepping in front of her path with arms crossed. Julia glanced at him, measured, unshaken. "I live here." Greg scoffed. "You? Here? This isn't that kind of place. Turn around before I call someone." Julia inhaled slowly and pulled out a sleek black folder. "I'm the owner of Penthouse 29. Here's the deed, and all verification." But Greg didn't touch the folder. He pinched it with 2 fingers as if it were garbage. "I see fake documents every week," he sneered. "Don't waste my time." Nearby, a woman in a silk blouse whispered loudly, "Probably thinks this place is Section 8. Julia's jaw tightened. She had climbed every rung of a brutal corporate ladder. Built her name from the ground up. Yet here, none of it mattered. Because to Greg, and apparently to everyone watching, she was just a black woman in sneakers with no business walking into Westview Towers. Still, she didn't flinch. "I suggest you read that document, Mr. Hudson," she said, voice low and controlled. "You're making a serious mistake." But Greg was already laughing as he waved down Mark Davis, the head of security. Mark was taller, meaner, and just as dismissive. "Another one trying to pass forged papers," Greg said to Mark, handing him the folder. "This one's persistent." Mark barely skimmed the first page before snapping it shut and tossing it back. "We don't have time for this." The air around Julia crackled with tension. She could feel a crowd forming behind her. But she didn't move. Instead, she said something that changed everything. "If you touch me again or continue this without verifying my ID in the city records, I promise, you will not have a job by lunchtime." That was the first moment Greg paused. Not from fear, but from the arrogance of someone who thought she was bluffing. "I've been here 12 years, he spat. "And people like you don't scare me." Then came the voice from above. "What is going on down here?" It was Ryan Parker, the executive manager of Westview Towers. Young, white, Harvard-educated, and with a jaw that stayed locked in permanent judgment, Ryan descended the stairs like a king arriving to chastise peasants. "She's trespassing," Mark said. "Trying to claim she owns Penthouse 29, Greg added with a laugh. Ryan looked Julia up and down once, slowly, then sneered. "You don't belong here. Either leave now or we'll have to call the police." Julia didn't blink. "Go ahead," she said. "But when they arrive and confirm what I already know, you'll have far more to worry about than your precious reputation." The air was tense, the kind of silence that crushes sound before it's even spoken. Julia Mitchell stood tall, alone, but unmoved, at the front entrance of Westview Towers, as if the marble floors themselves waited to see how this would unfold. Ryan Parker narrowed his eyes at her. His polished shoes clicked as he stepped closer, towering over her with a fake smile and smugness in his voice. "You're bold. I'll give you that," he said. "But this little performance ends now." He turned to Mark Davis. "Call the police. Get her removed before she makes more of a scene." Mark didn't hesitate. With one hand already on his radio, he smirked like a man certain of victory. Greg crossed his arms, satisfied. Behind them, murmurs of confirmation spread among the crowd like wildfire. They were convinced she didn't belong. That she couldn't. But Julia had spent her entire life turning couldn't into did. "I suggest," she said slowly, enunciating each word as if etching them into stone, "you don't make that call unless you want this entire company, this entire building, to face public backlash so severe, you'll wish this was just a nightmare." "Oh, is that a threat now?" Ryan laughed. "No," Julia replied, her voice like velvet over steel. "It's a guarantee." And just then, as if the universe decided it was time for receipts, a black town car screeched to a halt in front of the building. Out stepped a sharply dressed man in a navy suit, clipboard in hand and urgency in his stride. His name was Julian Lattimore, Julia's personal legal counsel and crisis advisor. He walked past the stunned onlookers and nodded at Julia. Then, with commanding presence, turned to Ryan. "You must be Mr. Parker," Julian said flatly, extending a business card. "And I believe you've just made the most expensive mistake of your career." Ryan blinked. "Who are you?" "Julian Lattimore, attorney at law. I represent Ms. Julia Mitchell, owner of Penthouse 29, chairwoman of Mitchell Holdings, and primary shareholder in the management company that owns Westview Towers." Every head turned. Some gasped. Others dropped their drinks. A woman clutched her designer purse as if realizing she had insulted a queen. Ryan's smirk faltered. This must be some sort of trick. Julian held out a city-verified property document and pointed to Julia's name printed clearly, alongside a notarized seal. "Official city record. This document is also registered with your buildings board. You ignored it. You dismissed it. You mocked it." Julia stepped forward, holding her head high. "You thought you could humiliate me, throw me out, and call the police, all because I didn't fit your idea of who could live here." Mark Davis stammered. We didn't know who you were." "You didn't care," Julia cut in. "Because in your eyes, I wasn't worth knowing." Just then, the unmistakable sound of sirens echoed closer. 2 police cruisers pulled up, and officers stepped out, already radioing in the call from Westview Towers. Ryan turned toward them with misplaced confidence. "Officers, thank you for coming. This woman was attempting to—" "Actually," Julian interjected, holding out another document, "before you say another word, I suggest you verify her ID and her ownership status." The officers took the papers, and one scanned Julia's driver's license with his tablet. Within seconds, his expression changed. "Ms. Julia Mitchell. Confirmed owner of Penthouse 29, he said, glancing between Ryan and the others. "And a registered board chair of the parent management company?" "That's correct," Julian confirmed. The second officer turned to Ryan. "Sir, it appears this was a false report. You claimed a trespasser. What you actually did was prevent a property owner from accessing her own home." Greg Hudson began to tremble. We didn't mean to." The crowd behind them. Silent. Utterly silent. The very same people who had whispered and laughed now stared at Julia with wide eyes and open mouths. Ryan tried to salvage what little authority he had left. "This is all a misunderstanding. Ms. Mitchell, surely we can talk this through." But Julia wasn't having it. "No, Mr. Parker. You made your position clear the moment you looked me up and down and dismissed me without a word. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racism. And she didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. The truth in her words carried more power than any scream ever could. One of the officers stepped forward, arms crossed. "Ms. Mitchell, do you want to press charges for racial discrimination and false reporting?" Julia stared directly into Ryan's pale face. She didn't blink. "Not yet," she said. "But I do want this entire incident documented. Every word. Every action." Ryan's voice cracked as he tried to laugh. "Julia, come on, we can work this out. Let's go to the office and talk." Julia's eyes narrowed. "You'll be in an office, Ryan. But it won't be one you like." And just like that, she turned to the stunned crowd behind her. "For anyone wondering if what you just witnessed is rare, it isn't. This happens every day to people who look like me. But today, it happened to the wrong woman." The weight of silence that followed Julia's last words was unlike anything Westview Towers had ever experienced. It wasn't just awkward, it was damning. The kind of silence that made people rethink everything they believed about who belongs where, and why. Ryan Parker stood frozen, hands twitching at his sides, trying to will time backward. But it was too late. The officers had already begun taking formal statements, writing notes with precision. Greg Hudson slunk away from the crowd, clearly hoping he could vanish before further humiliation found him. But Julia saw him. And she made sure no one else forgot. "Greg," she called calmly, her voice cutting across the courtyard. He stopped mid-step, back stiffening like a child caught stealing. Slowly, he turned. "You put your hands on me. You called the police. You mocked legal documents and denied me access to my own home, all without reading a single word," she said, eyes never leaving his. Greg tried to speak. But his voice cracked, and no words came out. "Don't worry," Julia said. "You won't be seeing that lobby again. Ever." Julian Lattimore stepped beside her, flipping through his iPad. "Formal complaints are being filed with the Building Oversight Board, City Housing Authorities, and the management firm's legal department. Oh, and our PR team has already drafted a press release. If any of you care to read it, check tomorrow's headlines." The crowd rustled. That hit harder than anyone expected. Julia turned back to Ryan. "You still think this is just an embarrassment? You've just jeopardized the entire image of Westview Towers. You and your staff didn't just insult me, you made it abundantly clear that this is a community where racism is tolerated, enforced, and encouraged." Ryan opened his mouth again, this time with a little less bravado. "Ms. Mitchell, I had no idea who you were." "And that's the problem," she interrupted sharply. "You only respect someone when you think they're powerful. But you showed your true self the moment you assumed I was beneath you." At that moment, a car pulled up behind the police vehicles, a sleek black Audi. Out stepped Amanda Reynolds, the CEO of Crownstone Residential, the parent company of Westview Towers. Her assistant trailed behind her, phone glued to one ear, panic etched into her every step. Amanda's face was already tight with concern. She didn't greet anyone, she made a direct line to Julia. "Julia," she said, her voice low and serious. "I came as soon as I got your call. I heard some of what happened." Julia folded her arms. "You should have heard all of it." Amanda glanced at the officers, at the crowd, at Greg and Mark and Ryan, three men suddenly looking like ghosts of themselves. Amanda's gaze hardened. "Then I will. Right now. Every detail." Julia didn't sugarcoat anything. She told Amanda about the security team's immediate assumptions, the refusal to check her deed, the laughter, the jeers, and finally, the humiliation of having the police called on her just for trying to enter her own home. By the end of it, Amanda's face had gone from shocked to absolutely livid. "I apologize, Julia," Amanda said. "Deeply. And not just to you, but to everyone who had to witness this disgusting display of bias and ignorance." Amanda turned to the crowd and raised her voice so everyone could hear her. "This is not who we are, or who we claim to be. And starting today, every member of this management team, security included, is on immediate review. That includes you, Mr. Parker. Ryan stiffened. Amanda, please, you know how long I do, she snapped. And that's why this is even worse. Because you've been in power long enough to know better. She turned to Greg. You're fired. Effective immediately. You are no longer allowed on this property. Greg didn't argue. He didn't even lift his eyes. He simply nodded once, broken and pale, before walking toward the gate. Mark Davis, Amanda continued, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Any complaint, any incident, if I find a single past report of racial bias, you're done. Mark's jaw tightened. He nodded, but his eyes showed a flicker of fear. It was clear, this wasn't the first time. As Amanda addressed the residents next, her tone was blunt but necessary. For those of you who participated in the public shaming of Ms. Mitchell today, I hope you reflect deeply on your actions. If you think this building should be exclusive to a certain kind of person, I promise you, you won't like the changes coming. Julia stepped forward beside her. I'll be staying, she announced. But not quietly. From today onward, I will personally lead the implementation of a diversity, equity, and accountability initiative in this building. She glanced around at the crowd again. Some looked away, ashamed. Others nodded, genuinely remorseful. Bias thrives in silence, Julia said. And I won't allow silence to live here anymore. A little girl, no older than 10, tugged on her mother's sleeve near the edge of the crowd. Mommy, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, that's the lady they tried to stop. But she owns the whole place. The mother looked heartbroken. But she bent down and whispered, that's why we speak up now, sweetheart. Julia heard it. And for the first time that day, her heart softened just a little. Amanda turned to her, eyes filled with something deeper than corporate damage control, something like true respect. You just saved this place, Julia, she said quietly. No, Julia replied, shaking her head. I didn't save it. I'm rebuilding it. The crowd began to thin, but the tension still hovered in the air like fog after a storm. Security officers shifted awkwardly, unsure of their roles now that the hierarchy had crumbled. The residents, many of whom had watched Julia's public humiliation in silence, now wore sheepish expressions, their faces reflecting a mix of shame and disbelief. Amanda Reynolds stood beside Julia, her arms folded as she watched Greg Hudson's figure disappear down the street. Behind her, her assistant scribbled notes frantically. The CEO of Crownstone Residential rarely showed public anger, but today, she looked ready to dismantle her entire executive team. We need a full audit, Amanda said firmly, turning to her assistant. Pull every discrimination complaint filed over the last 5 years. Every one. The assistant nodded and darted off without another word. Julia, still standing tall, glanced toward the lobby. Her fingers clenched briefly. She hadn't yet stepped inside. Not after what they did to her at the threshold of her own home. But now it was time. As she took a step forward, the automatic doors whooshed open, but instead of the cold, dismissive front desk she'd been treated to before, a figure stood there, nervously waiting, Tina Adams. The young receptionist had been watching the entire confrontation in silence. She hadn't joined in, but she hadn't spoken up either. And that silence weighed heavy on her now. Her eyes welled as Julia approached. Ms. Mitchell, Tina began, her voice trembling. I should have said something. I knew you lived here. I've seen your name on the board. I recognized your face. But I froze. Julia stopped in front of her. And what stopped you, Tina? Tina's lip quivered. I was afraid. Not of you, but of them. I didn't want to lose my job. There was a pause. A silence not of judgment, but of truth hanging heavy in the air. I understand fear, Julia said softly. But fear becomes complicity when it stops us from doing what's right. Tina nodded slowly, her face flushing with shame. You're right. I'm sorry. I really am. Julia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Today's your chance to change, Tina. Don't waste it. Tina lowered her head, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Thank you for giving me that chance. As Julia passed the front desk, a few remaining residents offered hesitant nods. Some smiled faintly, genuine this time. Not the forced, polite grins they had given each other for years, but the kind that acknowledged the power of truth when it walked straight into your lobby. She took the elevator to the 29th floor. Alone. As the doors slid closed, she exhaled, her mind racing back to that humiliating moment just hours ago, being told to leave, laughed at, accused of forging ownership documents. She pressed her palm against the elevator wall, grounding herself. You're here now. You're home. When the doors opened, she stepped into the airy hallway that led to Penthouse 29, her sanctuary, her hard-earned retreat. She unlocked the door, and as it swung open, the floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in golden light. The skyline of the city she had conquered stretched out before her. And yet, it wasn't peace she felt, it was purpose. She walked straight to her office nook, pulled out her laptop, and typed a message to the entire board of Crownstone Residential. The subject line was simple: accountability begins now. In it, she laid out her full plan. A third-party investigation into racial discrimination complaints. Mandatory bias and cultural sensitivity training for all employees and residents. An anonymous reporting hotline with protection protocols for whistleblowers. A resident forum every quarter to address concerns and foster community unity. She didn't wait for approval. She sent it with one click. Because she wasn't asking for permission anymore, she was leading. An hour later, Amanda called. I read your proposal, she said. We're greenlighting it immediately. And Julia? Yes. You're not just the chairwoman now. As of this afternoon, I'm appointing you as Executive Equity Officer across all our properties. Julia blinked. You're serious? Amanda's voice was resolute. We need someone who doesn't just understand the problem, but who has the spine to fix it. That's you. Julia's chest rose with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for years. Then let's get to work. Downstairs, the building was already beginning to shift. Tina, inspired by Julia's courage, had begun cleaning out the front desk storage cabinets. Inside, she found years of outdated paperwork, misfiled incident reports, and one chilling binder marked Visitor Watch List. Among the names, a disproportionate number of black and brown residents and guests. Tina carried it straight to Amanda herself. This can't keep happening, Tina said, voice stronger than before. Amanda took one look at the binder and nodded. You're right. It won't. Within 2 hours, Amanda issued a sweeping order to every building under Crownstone's name. The era of silence, unchecked bias, and systemic exclusion was over. Back in Penthouse 29, Julia stood once more on her balcony, watching the city below as the sky turned a burnished orange. The sun dipped slowly behind the skyline, beautiful, unbothered, and unbreakable. Just like her. She knew that this wasn't the end. There would be backlash. Resistance. Whispers in hallways, articles misinterpreting her actions. But she didn't care. The battle for dignity was never won in comfort. It was won in moments like this, when one woman decided enough was enough. The next morning, the energy at Westview Towers felt different. For the first time in years, the front lobby wasn't a cold gauntlet of judgment. Tina, now armed with confidence and determination, greeted each resident with a warm smile. No longer the silent bystander, she was quickly becoming the face of a cultural shift the building didn't even know it needed. Julia Mitchell arrived downstairs, dressed sharply in a tailored navy pantsuit, and was immediately greeted not with stares, but with respect. An elderly resident named Harold Simmons, who had once stood quietly watching her humiliation, stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell. I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything that day. I should have. I've lived here for 11 years, and I've seen things, but I never spoke up." Julia paused and met his eyes. "Then speak up now. From today forward." Harold nodded slowly. "I will. You have my word." A few others stepped out of the elevators, clearly waiting to see if this new environment was truly real. An Indian couple who had rarely been acknowledged in the gym. A young Asian artist who had once had her delivery driver interrogated. Even a single black father with a teenage daughter, new to the building, looked around with cautious hope. And for the first time, they were welcomed. Julia walked into the newly assembled conference room on the second floor where Amanda Reynolds and the board of Crownstone Residential had gathered. The emergency meeting had been called following national attention on the incident. Several news outlets had picked up the story under headlines like, "Black CEO denied entry to her own penthouse, then fired entire staff in 5 minutes." A viral photo of Julia standing calmly as officers confirmed her identity had ignited social media, with tens of thousands praising her restraint, power, and grace under fire. The story was trending under hashtags like #JusticeAtWestview and #JuliaMitchell. But Julia wasn't interested in fame. She wanted results. Amanda began the meeting. "Let's get to the point. Julia, you now officially oversee the new division for equity and accountability. What are your immediate directives?" Julia clicked her remote. The slideshow behind her lit up. "First," she said, "we begin with what no one wants to look at, the complaints you've buried. Every building under Crownstone management will undergo a full third-party audit. Every report of discrimination will be reopened. Every silence must be investigated." There were a few shifting seats in the room. Some executives clearly felt threatened. Julia continued. "Second, mandatory anti-bias and racial equity training begins this quarter. Everyone. No exceptions." A hand shot up. It was Gerald Lang, a stiff-suited board member known for resisting change. "Ms. Mitchell, isn't this a little aggressive? We've never had this kind of approach before." Julia stepped forward. "Exactly. And look where that silence got us. You let racism and elitism thrive because you were too comfortable to challenge it." Gerald shifted, jaw tightening, but said nothing. "Third," Julia said, flipping the slide, "every property will display a plaque at the entrance with this statement. This is a community of dignity, respect, and equality. Racism will not be tolerated." And finally, she added, "we are launching the Westview Accountability Fund. A portion of profits from every building will go towards supporting tenants who face discrimination, harassment, or abuse, whether financial assistance for legal fees or relocation support. Because words without action are decoration." Amanda leaned back, a slow smile forming. "This is bigger than policy. This is culture reform." Julia nodded. "Exactly." When the meeting adjourned, Amanda lingered behind. "Julia," she said, "I want to show you something." She handed Julia a folder. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, from other CEOs, building managers, and diversity organizations thanking Julia for standing up and asking how they could implement similar changes. Julia's breath caught for a moment. She hadn't realized just how far the story had traveled. "This is what leadership looks like," Amanda said. "Not just managing, but transforming." Back at Westview Towers, the changes were already rippling. A new security team had been brought in, one that went through Julia's revised training program. Residents noticed immediately. They were greeted with eye contact, friendly professionalism, and, for the first time, equality. Tina had started a community newsletter called The Tower Voice, giving residents of all backgrounds a platform to share their experiences and ideas. One story in particular stood out, a note from a 12-year-old black girl named Amani, who wrote, "I saw Ms. Mitchell stand up when they laughed at her. And now, I know I can stand up too. Thank you for showing me what strong really means." Julia read it 3 times. She folded the letter and tucked it into her notebook, the same notebook she had carried the day she was denied entry. Change, she realized, wasn't just policy or paperwork. It was moments like this, quiet, unseen revolutions born from courage. 2 weeks later, Westview Towers looked nothing like the fortress of exclusivity it once was. The cold stares had melted. Elevator rides were no longer silent or tense. The air buzzed with something unfamiliar, genuine connection. Julia Mitchell sat in the rooftop garden, sipping tea from a ceramic mug. Amani, the little girl who had written the touching letter, sat beside her with a sketch pad on her lap, legs swinging over the bench edge. "Do you really run the whole building?" Amani asked, her eyes wide. Julia smiled. "I help lead the company that owns this building. That means I help make the rules and make sure people are treated fairly." Amani beamed. "That's so cool. When I grow up, I want to be a boss too. But, like, a nice boss." Julia chuckled. "That's the best kind. You should write that down." Amani did, carefully, letter by letter. Just then, Amanda Reynolds approached, holding a small envelope in her hand. She greeted Amani with a warm smile and then turned to Julia, her face serious. "We just completed our internal review," she said. "I wanted you to see it first." Julia unfolded the letter. It detailed dozens of incidents, reports of profiling, exclusion, verbal mistreatment. Many of them had come from buildings with nearly identical cultures to Westview Towers. And most had been previously ignored, lost, or dismissed as misunderstandings. Julia let the paper rest on her lap. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. Amanda nodded. "But now, people are talking. They're not afraid anymore. That's your doing." Julia looked out over the city skyline. "Talking is only the first step. The real work is making sure no one needs to file a complaint in the first place." Amanda offered a quiet smile. "We've started outreach with 6 other management companies. They want to adopt your policies." Julia's brow lifted slightly. "Already?" "Your name's making waves, Julia," Amanda said. "They're calling it the Westview Protocol." Julia looked down, almost bashful. "It shouldn't take humiliation for change to happen." "No, but sometimes it takes a storm to rebuild the foundation," Amanda said. "You brought the storm. Now we build." That afternoon, Julia was invited to speak at a local university. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students, professors, and local community leaders packed every seat. She stood at the podium, not as a CEO or board chair, but as a black woman who had once been laughed at for simply trying to go home. "When you fight for what's right," Julia said, her voice steady, "you won't always be met with applause. Sometimes, you'll be met with silence, or worse, mockery. But if you stay grounded in the truth, the world eventually moves with you." Her eyes scanned the room, stopping on the faces of young black women in the front row, each one seeing in her the possibilities for themselves. "This story didn't begin with a confrontation at a building gate," she continued. "It began long before that, with years of being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. But that moment, when I stood on the steps of Westview Towers and said, 'Enough,' that's when my voice became bigger than my name." She finished her talk to thunderous applause. But even louder than the claps was the quiet resolve that settled into hearts and minds that day. Back at Westview, more small but powerful changes unfolded. The anonymous discrimination hotline Julia proposed received over 100 calls in the first 2 weeks, some from residents, others from employees too afraid to speak before. Each call was reviewed by an independent board, and swift action followed when necessary. An open forum was hosted in the building's community center, where residents could share grievances and suggestions in a respectful, moderated setting. Julia attended every minute. She didn't just listen, she responded. A Middle Eastern family shared how their teenage son was once stopped by security 3 times in 1 week. An elderly black woman recalled how packages for her unit often went missing or were delivered late. A gay couple admitted they were initially afraid to hold hands in the elevator after a resident glared at them. And every story was met with validation and a plan of action. What had once been a place of exclusion was transforming into a model for accountability, and Julia was at the helm of it all. One night, after everyone had left the forum, Julia remained behind. Alone in the community center, she walked over to the display wall now filled with pinned notes from residents. Some were anonymous. "Thank you for seeing us. I never thought I'd feel safe here. My daughter asked if we could invite Ms. Mitchell to dinner. She thinks you're a superhero." Julia smiled faintly at the last one, brushing her fingers over the corner of the note. She sat down, exhaled, and allowed herself a quiet moment of release. The fight wasn't over. It never truly would be. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She was building something. Not just policies. Not just reputation. But trust. Belonging. Justice. And for Julia Mitchell, that was the legacy she had always wanted. A year had passed since the incident that once humiliated Julia Mitchell at the entrance of her own penthouse. But now, that memory no longer stung the same way. Because in its place stood a movement, a model, and most importantly, a legacy. It was a bright spring morning. Julia stood on the balcony of Penthouse 29, watching the sun stretch golden fingers across the city skyline. Birds flitted past the glass, and below, the sounds of laughter and life echoed through the courtyard. Westview Towers had changed. Where once the lobby whispered suspicion, it now spoke welcome. Where silence had once concealed bias, open conversation now invited growth. The lobby now featured a permanent plaque on the wall, a simple, bold engraving that read: Dignity. Respect. Equity. This is your home. Just below it was a small bronze plate that read, The Mitchell Standard. Inside the building, every member of staff, from janitors to managers, had undergone mandatory equity training. The anonymous hotline had helped resolve dozens of cases across Crownstone's properties, and Julia's Westview protocol had been adopted by over 30 other residential firms. Amanda Reynolds, now a nationally recognized leader in corporate ethics, credited one person in every press conference and interview: it all started with Julia Mitchell. But for Julia, the real reward came in quieter moments. Moments like this one. Tina Adams, now promoted to Resident Relations Director, knocked gently on the penthouse door. "Ms. Mitchell," she said as Julia opened the door. "Tina," Julia smiled. "You look good." Tina beamed, holding up a manila folder. "I thought you'd want to see this. The final report from the first year of the protocol." Julia took the file and scanned the highlights. Complaints had dropped by 83%. Retention among staff of color had increased by 70%. Most stunning of all, resident satisfaction across all cultural and racial groups had reached an all-time high. "It's working," Tina said quietly, as if surprised. "It's only the beginning," Julia replied. "We have more to do." Then, a soft, familiar knock echoed from down the hall. When Julia opened the door, she was greeted by a sight that paused her heart for a beat: the little girl, Amani, now a year older, holding a school project, a poster board with Julia's picture in the center. "I picked you for Women Who Changed the World Day," Amani said proudly. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Julia knelt to meet her eyes. "Ask me anything." Amani's eyes sparkled. "How did you know you were strong enough to stand up to them?" Julia thought for a moment, then placed a hand over the girl's. I didn't, she said honestly. But I knew if I didn't speak up, nothing would change. And sometimes, that's what strength really is, doing the right thing, even if your voice shakes. Amani grinned. That's what my mom says now, too. She said you helped everyone find their voice. Julia smiled, her throat tightening just slightly. Then we did it together. Later that afternoon, Julia attended a gathering in the newly named Mitchell Community Hall on the ground floor of Westview Towers. The hall was filled with flowers, food, music, and families of all backgrounds mingling like they'd known each other for years. Amanda took the microphone. 1 year ago today, this building was a symbol of division, she said. But one woman turned that moment into a movement. And today, we honor her not just for what she endured, but for what she built. Julia Mitchell, would you join me? Applause erupted as Julia stepped to the front, the lights catching in her curls, her posture steady and proud. She looked around at the faces, people who once doubted her, now cheering for her. She found Harold Simmons, the elderly man who apologized first. He gave her a proud thumbs up. Tina stood nearby, arms folded, smiling through misty eyes. And near the edge of the crowd, Amani waved wildly, her poster board still in hand. Julia spoke slowly, choosing every word like a brick in the foundation she continued to build. This place once told me I didn't belong, she began. But instead of leaving, I stayed. I stood. And I spoke. She paused. Because we're not just here to own property, we're here to own our voice, our dignity, our place in the world. The room held its breath. I'm not proud of what happened to me. I'm proud of what we did with it. We took ignorance and turned it into education. We turned judgment into justice. And most importantly, we turned silence into strength. Applause thundered through the hall, not out of obligation, but out of genuine reverence. Julia stepped down from the stage, enveloped in hugs, gratitude, and newfound respect. That night, as she returned to Penthouse 29 and stood once more at the glass balcony rail, Julia reflected on the year behind her. It wasn't just about proving she belonged, it was about proving no one should have to. Her story had begun with a guard's cruel question. What are you doing here? But now, every part of this building answered it for her. She was here to change everything. And she did. Julia Mitchell's story is not just a tale of one woman's strength, but a lesson in what happens when dignity is denied and justice rises in its place. Her journey reminds us, when you stand for truth, even in the face of humiliation, you don't just win back your place, you change the entire system. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, real-life stories that echo louder than hate. What would you have done in Julia's shoes? Have you ever had to fight to be seen? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. Until next time, stay strong, stay just, and keep your echo true.